Hello and welcome. This is Kelly Fitzpatrick with RedMonk with another What Is How To. Today we'll be talking about distributed API management. And for those of you who have kind of followed our What Is How To series, you may remember that we've already done a video on what is a distributed API gateway. Today's topic is somewhat related to that. And if you haven't caught that video, I recommend watching it because there's a lot of good stuff there. But don't feel that you have to watch that before we kind of dive into distributed API management. Now, also, you may notice that our guest today, Chris Sterling, also, he's a returning guest. He was our guest for the distributed API gateway video. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with him, Chris, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Sterling. I'm the Senior Product Line Manager over here in the map view of VMware, and I focus on API management. So I'm looking at API management from a consumer discovery point of view, and also on the gateway itself and how it integrates with service meshes and all the other things like Kubernetes, dial tone, and such that we have here at VMware.
Excellent. Well, welcome back. I'm always happy when people are willing to film with me again.
No, I really enjoyed it last time. It was great.
Yeah, no, that was a great video. But tell me a bit more about today's topic. So distributed API management, that sounds like a bit more meta than specifically distributed API gateways. But what type of problems or API management problems does that approach to API management aim to solve?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of enterprises and companies had started off with their API experience really being very focused on a specific set of APIs. We're kind of excluding the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world, but most enterprises that were taking on this endeavor really were focused around like a set of APIs. And they start out at that point, they get an API management tool, and it's much more of a centralized operational experience. And what we've seen is that over time, this has started to break down as mostly cloud native has become much more prevalent. As you see public cloud migration, you see a lot more on-premise clouds, cloud in quotes. You really have this idea of being more distributed. And that distribution of your applications and also the scale at which you start to expand starts to put a lot of strain on a centralized model of API management. So what we see is that distributed API gateways obviously is a way to start to work away from that. You can have your lines of business with different security models, different nomenclatures, different ways of governing their API gateways, separating out into distributed API gateway instances. And then you also have this idea of, well, what about the API consumers? I might have all different API consumers as an enterprise. I may have some partners who are API consumers. They might want a branded portal just specific for the APIs they're entitled to or want to use from our organization. I might have the general public that's API consumers, but what we're seeing way more of is the internal API economy. So you have these internal teams and lines of business sharing APIs amongst each other, and they have a very hard time actually identifying and discovering what each other's APIs do and where they live and how do I use them. And so instead of making that a point-to-point manual solution or even trying to find it through mechanisms that don't play nicely with APIs, we really want to make this API portal a distributed API portal experience, something that can connect to distributed API gateways, can be focused on a particular area of APIs. You can have any number of API portals for different needs. We see that as what we've heard from customers that they need.
Excellent. And in our last video, we talked about this kind of concept of API sprawl, which I'm also hearing the echoes of that, here as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't imagine. And I talk to so many customers now, and I hear it over and over again is that they start off small with a few teams with APIs, but then their configuration starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger as more and more teams start to want to expose APIs. And it becomes complicated. There becomes delay. We heard from developers in surveys that we've done that there's days and weeks of delay just to get their API changes in.
All right. Well, my guess is the next thing we're going to hear about might be API discovery.
That's correct. But I kind of want to talk about those use cases, right? We kind of mentioned them a little bit, but I want to show kind of an example. You could imagine, some kind of insurance company or someone taking a policy and doing a request for a policy, and it goes through the agent portal. Now, an agent is logging in using single sign-on on their API gateway. And there could be a front end for the agent portal. There can be some APIs available, in this case, a consumer policy request. And that request has to go through a fraud detection API. So what it does is it has a client certificate key token that it uses to call the fraud line of business, and that gets authorized to make the API call. And so the fraud line of business has an entirely different security model than the agent line of business, single sign-on versus client certificates. And the fraud line of business, then once you're authorized, you can go through the fraud API and detect any kind of issues and then come back. And obviously it's a little bit overly generic, but the idea here is that across these lines of business, you're going to see more and more of this API economy internally, and being able to access each other's APIs is very important. And also to discover them, like to know that the fact that there's a fraud detection API that we could use. Okay.
Yeah, and to know that it exists without a person having to tell you.
Exactly. And for the enterprise architecture group and anybody else that wants to be able to provide this information, to be able to have a single way for all of the development teams to find things, it's really powerful. You can do wikis and you can do, all kinds of sharing tools, but in the end, having a portal where you go through and you can actually drill down quickly and search just makes things much easier. And then from an external API consumer point of view, you might have people outside your organization using your APIs. The other idea here is that you should be able to expose to them those APIs you think they should be able to use. So in this scenario, you might have a dev, test, and prod API portal. So in dev, you might have a lot more experimental APIs that are being developed and thought about and evolving. And then you in test, they might be a little bit more stable, but there might be some documentation issues or, all the things you might find in a staging or test environment. And then once they get to this level, you go, okay, they're going to meet the production stage. Now you can expose them to your external API consumers. And so you might have different portals at each layer being able to help you along the way, okay, and focused on those specific needs. So we're really tackling that is let's help the developers be able to develop the API documentation that they need to. Let's make sure it's testable. Let's make sure it can be exposed to production in a very specific way, and not all have that done through a centrally managed system. Let's make it so it's easy to use at each layer.
I like that. It's not essentially, it's not a central in terms of where kind of everything is, but there is this like standardized way of doing it. Meaning like I don't have to do one process over here, one process over there, and another process over here.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing a lot of, and that's where a lot of the strain comes in. We're seeing that I don't know what's going on in the API management world, but I'm exposing these paths on my service. And I want those to be on that API, exposure to others, whoever those internal or external consumers may be. Cool. And kind of go further. Well, what is our API portal? Maybe we can go into that a little bit. So the first thing that we do is the API portal really consumes from open API endpoints. Now, that could be our Spring Cloud Gateway commercial products that I talked about earlier or mentioned earlier, but it also could be any open API endpoint. So we find that we do have some customers who already have open API endpoints, and they really want this portal to show those, but also as they're starting to leverage Spring Cloud Gateway, they could start auto-generating documentation and getting a much better experience over there as well. So we want to be able to support both of those worlds, the brownfield and the greenfield at the same time. On top of that, what we see here is the first page that you come to typically in the portal. And what you're trying to do is discover APIs across any open API v2 or v3 specified resource, right? And so those sources can be pulled in, and it's really a setting an environment variable on the API portal to tell which sources this particular portal is going to point to. So that allows you to do your dev test prod versions of it, right? And each one of these boxes on here represent what we call an API group. An API group, it might be a Spring Cloud Gateway instance that gives you some metadata about the APIs it provides, or it could be an open API endpoint that references a particular type of APIs that are available there. Okay, so those API groups can be searched through and then drilled down into. And when you drill down into that, you now see your detailed documentation. You can actually expand different areas, and I could show that off in just a moment. But what I'm looking for here as an API consumer is, okay, which servers are it on? Is this located on? What kind of response codes might I get so that I have to handle those situations? All that information is here and available to you right out of the box. Now, I might as well go to a demo. Okay.
I mean, you know my philosophy, get to the demo as quickly as possible.
Exactly. So I have actually right here the API portal. And just so you know that we're actually doing this on a TKGI environment, so Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, and it is located on Google Cloud. If I go into the namespace, I'll show you all my namespaces. So I've got an API portal namespace, and I'll show you my animal rescue namespace in just a moment. And if I do a get all in here, you'll see that I've done some deployments of our API portal server. And the API portal is really a service in the end. So you can see that there's a service here. And if I was to do an ingress, I've actually applied a project contour ingress controller ingress to this. And it's pretty much a kubectl apply. Very simple way to expose your service externally. And I use the nip.io service in this case. So based on your IP address, able to redirect, right? Enough detail there. And now when I go to that particular location, one of the things I've already done is I've set the environment variable. In this particular case, I have the Swagger Pet Store, which is an online open API endpoint that is available to anybody. And I've also set it to my, it's actually to my Spring Cloud Gateway for Kubernetes operational instance. And it auto-generates that open API documentation for you from the API route configurations of the animal rescue application. So this is one of the auto-generated endpoints. I've already done that. I'm not going to have it restart everything. And you'll see now that we have animal rescue here. I've also logged in as my user, and you have SSO available to you, so you can do single sign-on for the portal. A lot of our customers don't even necessarily need that, so it's all configurable. You can decide if you need SSO, and it's just for authentication purposes, but it'll show who the subject is that's logged in currently. And then now I can drill down into the animal rescue documentation, and you'll see here that it has a server that it's pulling from. And I can go down into one of these particular instances and try it out. So let's go ahead and execute. And what's cool here is now you've gotten a JSON body back with a list of pets that are available to adopt. Now, this is the same listing that you would get here if I was to go ahead and do the animal rescue application. And the APIs are only available. This particular one is a list without an authorization token, so you don't need to be authenticated to access it. So that's why I was able to access it on the portal. Okay, we have other endpoints that are SSO enabled, and let's go ahead and look at one of those. In this case, you actually might have to put an authorization token in, right? So you'd have to actually create an authorization token beforehand to get access to that. Okay.
This is great. You get both the documentation, but also the I think the try it out feature.
Exactly.
Especially for someone who's like maybe getting started with like using APIs, this could be really, really useful.
For sure. I think that's the real powerful part. I mean, it's fairly simplistic, but in terms of the implementation and the detail, but the solution is really powerful for your API usage and consumer experience. So kind of to talk about what is our Spring Cloud Gateway auto-generated documentation. So Spring Cloud Gateway for Kubernetes is available. And of course, you can write your application services that are exposing APIs in any language that you want. So it's polyglot support. We have a Spring Cloud Gateway commercial gateway instance that can be created, any number of instances from our operator. That's a Kubernetes native operator. And then it has OSS, filters and predicates, things that you can use in your API route configuration, such as circuit breaking, rate limiting, header manipulation, all the fun things that you might want to do in an API gateway, along with some commercial ones like single sign-on and client certificates, et cetera. And you could also extend this to connect to external services and provide an API gateway around like a heritage app that's running on a VM somewhere. And then over time, you might do app modernization to that and start making smaller services deployed on Kubernetes. And we kind of talked about in the last video. And then you can also do single sign-on integration so that anybody coming to this gateway, it'll automatically do single sign-on. You can do RBAC, role-based access control, and all kinds of other things at a route level. And then we have the same functionality on Tanzu Application Service. Now, what's interesting is the auto-generated documentation. So in both cases of the Kubernetes and the Tanzu Application Service versions, they have an OpenAPI v3 documentation generator. And that generator is able to look at all the instances that are being managed in Tanzu Application Service, that'd be by our service broker, and on Kubernetes by our operator, are being managed there. And then it's able to generate a documentation array of OpenAPI specified v3 documentation. And it all comes from that same API route config that we're using to expose our APIs for our particular service. And what's nice about that is every single application now that's providing APIs can have their own lifecycle, their own API route config, and all of it in the end it gets exposed to the portal of choice. So it kind of all runs up the tree and it's able to be seen just based upon that update to the cluster, being able to create this custom resource and API route config, apply it to the cluster, and have that exposed through the gateway. Yeah, so that's kind of an overall view of kind of our API portal experience, the way it is today. Obviously, we're going to be adding a lot of capabilities to this in the near future, so stay tuned. But I definitely wanted to get that idea of API management doesn't have to be a centralized, focused idea. It really can be something that is distributed, enables teams to flow in a much more agile and deliberate way. They're able to do their API evolution as they need to. And then on top of that, from an operational standpoint, we still have all the operational controls and the pipelines and the focus areas. So I can have an API portal in dev, test, and prod being much more restrictive. A lot of these things can be done out today with API portal, Spring Cloud Gateway, and using them together.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the API portal itself as something that will be evolving to kind of, meet whatever API needs folks continue to have. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great overview of kind of what is distributed API management, but also how to get started with the API portal for VMware Tanzu.
Thank you very much, Kelly.